Good morning. This is actually the first time that I've been doing this in, post-COVID probably, but welcome to Stimson Center. My name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm a co-director of East Asia program, and I'm also a project director for Japan program here at Stimson. For a long time now, we have had the privilege of hosting the scholars from Taiwan who like to focus on their own their research about U.S.-Taiwan relations, Taiwan's own security concerns, and Taiwan's relations with the other countries. And I'd like to thank the TECRA for their generous support and collaboration. We very much appreciate it. For the last 3 months, we had a pleasure of hosting Dr. Chen Hui-Wu. He's a senior researcher from Academia Sinica, one of the prominent research institutions from Taiwan. And he focused on the issue that's been mind of pretty much all of us nowadays when we start talking more and more seriously about the impact of the supply chain of critical materials and minerals on our own national security. So he will going to share with you the results of his research. He neatly titled it as Taiwan's Economic Security, How is Chip Nationalism Affecting Taiwan? So he will share his research with you for the first 15 to 20 minutes. And then I would then actually like to invite our Stimson's Southeast Asia Program's Distinguished Fellow, Dr. Richard Cronin, who's sitting over right there. He actually also published a very interesting short paper on the very similar topic not too long ago. So I would very much encourage you to, I think one of our program staff could probably tweet it out, the link to his paper during this event, but I would very much also encourage you to look at that as well. So without ado, Dr. Wu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yuki, for your kind introduction. It's actually a pleasure to be here for 2 months, and 2 months is too short. Today, I would like to share some of my research interests. In the past few years, I work on. I'm an international economic lawyer, focusing on WTO and free trade stuff. And in the past few years, I'm working on semiconductor and supply chain, and especially economic security and chips. So, and I would like to walk you very quickly about some historical event. And because we are situated in some very interesting parts of Asia, not only because of earthquake, but also because we are situated in a very big neighbors, which is the PRC. So I would like to walk you through very quickly in the past 3 decades what has been in Taiwan and Taiwan and U.S. relations. Okay, I guess you can read it. So I will start from citing a passage, which is valid for today, but not actually. Actually in 1980, it's in 1987. The health and vitality of U.S. semiconductor industry is essential to American future competitiveness. We cannot allow it to be jeopardized by unfair trading practices. It's actually by Ronald Reagan. And what he said about unfair trade practices is actually not China. It's actually Japan. It's in the context U.S.-Japan chip conflict. So I just want to remind you what we are faced today is actually what has been happened in 1980s. But the difference between U.S.-Japan is much different from U.S.-China one, because U.S.-China one is the competition for hegemony. So let me start from what is economic security. Of course, in the past 3 decades, we have been facing economic globalization. the most important thing is the global supply chain and the global division of labor. And a lot of enterprise, they outsource, especially to Southeast Asia and to China. And because of the information and transportation technologies, most enterprise, they have very few inventories, and which help them to reduce their production cost. But as you know, because of COVID and the shipping cost and the shipping cost and the global supply chain disruption, it impacts highly on the supply chain security. So the basic idea about economic security is a reaction response to economic interdependence, which we tend to believe the more we have economic independent, the more peace and the more stable we are faced with. But in the past few years, because of the PRC, the China's and Russia's economic coalitions, and we have this feeling that the more integrated, the more economic independent, then the more you are vulnerable to the economic coercion of your enemy. This is what we call why economic security is a big issue now. And then I want to do it very quickly. In 1986, this is when US and Japan then signed the Semiconductor Agreement. And in 1987, this is TSMC was established 1 year after the US-Japan. So in fact, Taiwanese and Korean semiconductor was beneficiary of the US-Japan semiconductor dispute. And then it's 1998, 1989, when Tiananmen massacre was take place. Then at the same year, one of the former Taiwanese very important key figures, the Formosa Plastic, they intend to invest in China. And Taiwanese investment in China, it makes the economic growth of China very successful. And this is one, to some degree, the misfortune of Taiwanese is done by itself, unfortunately. So, and then in 1991, this is when Taiwan started its democratization process. And in 1992, let's agree, let's governing the relationship between Taiwan and China. And in 1992, there's a meeting between Taiwan and China in Hong Kong. And this is where in the next year, the key figures in Taiwan and China, they met in Singapore and then make some agreements. And then in 1996, there's what has been very frequent in today, but not that frequent at the time. That's a missile exercise by China. This is the third Taiwan Strait crisis due to Li Denghui, the former president's visit to Cornell, and also the first presidential election in Taiwan. And during this time, because of the economic rise of China, so the biggest problem for Taiwan's economic security is how to prevent hollowing out. So in that time, that's our key policy, try to prevent Taiwanese enterprise from investing in China, how to persuade them to stay in Taiwan. And then in 1997 is Hong Kong's handover back to China. And in 1999, there's a very famous interview by Deutsche Welle, saying the then president saying that the relationship between Taiwan and China is a special relation between state and state. And then it's 2000. 2000, this is the first time the pro-independence president came into power. And then in 2001, okay, it comes to the semiconductor. This is the first time one of the key semiconductors in Taiwan, UMC, it invests in China, which are called Hejian. This is the first time, the first investment, the biggest one, but at that time, Taiwan has not liberalized outbound investment to China. So in fact, the investment is illegal. So it's 2001. And 2003, TSMC, they decide to invest in China. And this is illegal because at that time, investment to China has been liberalized. And in 2005, there's a search by the DAs to UMC because of the accusation of a breach of trust, and also because of the trade theft and trade secrets. So in the past few years, and then in 2008, and this is when the fellow China President Ma Ying-jeou, he came to power. And after that, there's a conclusion between more or less free trade agreement between Taiwan and China. And in March 25th or 14th, there's a service agreement between Taiwan and China. And it invites a very big student movement called Sunflower Movement, which they occupied the Congress for 1 month. And then in 2015, there's a big, very big semiconductor enterprise in Taiwan called MediaTek, which is IC design. They call for the government to liberalize the investment from China, especially from which has already gone broke, Tsinghua Unisplendor, to accept Chinese investment in IC design, which is unthinkable today. You cannot imagine that U.S. is accepting investment from China's state fund or state capital. And this is the way it is when it goes back to 2015 in Taipei. They are thinking about they should accept investment from China. It's to me, I mean, it's, we say incroyable. Okay, and then it's 2016. TSMC invest in China. This is the second one. It's in Nanjing, and it's a 12-inch wafer. And then in 2016, this is when Tsai Ing-wen came into office. And 2017 is Trump administration and U.S. trade war starts. And then, then it's COVID-19. And most recently, TSMC decided to invest in Kumamoto, Dresden, and Arizona. And this is the past 3 or 4 decades of the development of Taiwan and semiconductors. I try to very quick. So the most important threat for Taiwanese security is, of course, the rise of China, because they are so big. They have the labor cost there is so low, and Taiwanese people, they speak the same language, more or less, with Chinese. So they want to relocate. And in the past 3 decades, the economic globalization, it promotes the relocation and outsourcing. So the first one, the most to some degree, it makes economic sense. You want to lower your production cost. But if you move out, then it invites a risk of hollowing out. So the first threat is a relocation to China. Firstly, Taiwanese enterprise, they relocate in China. Then in the past 3 years or 4 years, they relocate to Southeast Asia because of U.S.-China trade war, obviously. And also because the production cost in China is more and more higher. It's higher and higher. So the sectors are relocating to China and Southeast Asia. It starts stuff from textiles, bicycles, and then it goes to OEMs, such as the computers, assemblies, and now the most important one is, of course, in recent days, in these 2 days, is Foxconn, whose former chairman just announced he will run for the president of Taiwan. And then some attempts in semiconductors, especially some assembly packaging and test, and of course some foundries. There are 2 foundries by TSMC, and there are 1 foundry by UMC. So the biggest threat is because Taiwan is a small market economy, but China is a very powerful state economy. So this is the difficulty. And the best example for this is, as I mentioned, in 2015, Tsinghua Unispender, it bid for invest MediaTek, one of the biggest IC design company, and he also said it may to someday buy TSMC. And again, this is from today's perspective, it is a bit ridiculous. And so, but in the end, in terms of economic integration between Taiwan and China, there will be some ends. There will be eventually some decision whether you want to side with China or you want to side with US. And this is politics, and this is identity. And this is, in the end, the decision of economic security is a decision of your values. So, different thinking about Taiwan's the economic security measures. So from the very beginning, in the end of 1990s, when the economic rise of China was in the very beginning, and before China entered into the World Trade Organization. So the most important thing for the former President Li Denghui and also former President Chen Shui-bian, those 2 are formal independence, is how to prevent Taiwanese enterprise being devoted all of their capitals and technologies into China. How to prevent the hollowing out into China. But at that time, as I mentioned, that's a trend for outsourcing and offshoring, because enterprise, they want to choose somewhere the labor cost is cheap and production cost is cheap, and people, to some degree, they don't care about environmental standards. So does Taiwanese enterprise. So they move to China. And this is the first point, the first period. And the second period is under my administration. They believe that close economic integration would bring up peace, prosperity, and security, and which is not true to my personal perspective. So, and in the end, there's a free trade agreement between Taiwan and China, and there's a service agreement between Taiwan and China. But eventually, it invite a student protest. And the current China administration, she was faced with U.S.-China trade war and tech competition or tech rivalry. U.S. and China, they are competing technology leadership, more or less like the one between U.S. and USSR in the Cold War era. And of course, we are facing the global supply chain issues arising from COVID-19 and supply chain security resilience. And one of the biggest issues for Thai administration today is countries, they are thinking, okay, we need chips. But okay, we need drink milk. Yes. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a farm in your house. The problem for TSMC or for chips is every countries, they think they need chips. But does it make sense to have your foundry in your territory, in your soil? Imagine, okay, before COVID-19, before pandemic, TSMC is not important. I mean, in terms of economic size, compared to Intel, compared to this Apple, Samsung, even compared to Qualcomm, Broadcom. So what make countries, they feel they are compelled to have foundries in their territory? In terms of economic sense, it makes sense. It is not a coincidence that most foundries, they are in Taipei, not in Taipei, in Science Park of Taiwan or in South Korea. it is not an accident. It makes a lot of economic sense. For us, I always like to say that we Taiwanese, we work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And it is not the case in US, fortunately or unfortunately. And you see the news today, there's a dispute in Arizona, the workers and the TSMC, and they are fighting with each other, whether the US should allow Taiwanese builders to come to US for building the factory or foundry of TSMC. Okay, I think you are looking for this. Okay, unfortunately, the rate. So, on the left side, you see the equipment and chemicals. Equipment, it comes from mainly ASML, the Dutch company. And the chemical side, it comes mainly from Japan, and some from China, if you follow the news. And the middle part, there are some key players. Korean one, and this is actually a paper which will be published by a book, which I edit next year. It will be published. So it is one of the chapters. And the middle side, there, you will have a Foundry, which is the TSMC one, is the most famous player. And you will also have the outsourcing assembly and testing, which the biggest player is ASE. And then we also have IC design. Most of them, they are located in US. And those IC design, most of them, they don't have their own foundries. They just design the chip, the IC. And then the TSMC would manufacture those IC for them. And this is a different model. And there's another model which we call IDM, which means that they have their design and they manufacture the chip by themselves. And this is a different model, which the reason why TSMC choose not to do design all the stuff, because our engineers, they work 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. That's why they can excel on doing this. I highly doubt whether this model can succeed in US or in Germany. The chairman, the former chairman of TSMC, Morris Chang, he has been very opposed for this idea. And I to some degree, to a large degree, I agree with him, because the working culture is quite different, unfortunately. And it could to some degree succeed in Japan. Unfortunately, the Japanese, they work as hard as we do. So, and the downstream is we will see IC distributors, and we also have OEM and ODMs, such as Foxconn again, and also have Quanta, Compaq, and Pacardrum. These are companies. They migrate first to China, now they migrate to Southeast Asia because of cheap labors. And this is the semiconductor and up and downstream producers. And you have a basic idea what semiconductor is. And those people who are worrying is actually one of the very peculiar parts, the foundry part. And then this is where TSMC and UMC, where they invest. TSMC have a tool in China, and now they have one in Japan, one in Arizona, and the Dresden one, it has not yet a mark. And UMC, it has one in Singapore, it has also one in China. And ironically, the former chairman who decided to invest in China, the UMC, now is the most vocal proponent for independence. or anti-China, because the lesson he learned probably tell him that China, the PRC, cannot be trusted. So then I think I run half of my time. I try to speed up. So let's go back to 1985. This is the first US-Japan chip war. So the basic idea is Japan export a lot of DRAM, which is memory, and is a very specialization product. Almost every product can be replaced. So Japan export a lot. Then US decide to impose punitive tariff based on Section 301 and also anti-dumping agreements. So then US and Japan, they decide to enter into an agreement in 1986. After that, because this agreement, Taiwanese and South Korean enterprise, they enter into market. And as I said, TSMC was established 1 year after this agreement. And this is the land in 1980s. And what about the US-China chip war today? It's actually not about DRAM. It's about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and electric autonomous vehicle, and everything you need for high technology, even F-35 jets. Yeah, so it's very different. I mean, in terms of the US-China chip war today, is very different from the one in 1980s, because the usage or application of chips nowadays is widespread, and it's very important in high technologies, in artificial intelligence or in quantum computing. And it's also, the first surface of US-China chip war or US-China trade war go back to the made in China 2025. The root cause is China's state capitalism, because we tend to believe China invests so much its own funding into its strategic enterprises, strategic industries. In the end, it may overcut, it may bypass the U.S. leadership in technologies. And so if we look back to, in fact, it starts from US-China chip war. It starts from Huawei and ZTE. Trump administration decided to put these companies into entity list. But in fact, before this, in Obama administration, it has already decided to block the acquisition of Broadcom due to national security concerns. And the US-China chip war is actually a multidimensional, so it's more than tariff. It includes a lot of measures, export control, investment screening. And originally, the CFIUS, the investment screening, only covers inbound investment, which means foreign investment into US territory. But it extends to outbound investment. And I'm proud to say that we are one of the very first countries who impose outbound investment screening, because a lot of Taiwanese enterprise, they want to invest in China, and unfortunately, China is not particularly friendly to us. So we have to start from our enterprise, from investing one country who doesn't like us so much. So it also extend the current US-China chip war also extend to portfolio investment, which is undergoing. And of course, there's economic espionage and also forced technology transfer. And one of the interesting part is it also includes the prohibition of US citizens and green card holders to work for Chinese high-tech companies. So how do we deal with the economic security nexus? There's two different rationales. on the one hand, enterprise, they were saying if we can benefit from Chinese market, then we can invest on new technologies. If you run faster, then China can never catch up with us. This is one rationale. The other side is because there could be a danger, we have to impose very hawkish control. And there's always a compete between these two rationales. And on the one hand, there's a national interest, but on the other hand, there's a corporate interest. So the most difficult part, both in US and in Taiwan, how to convince the enterprise or the corporate interest to get on board, to stand in line with the national interest. And the US-China technological rivalry is very different from the one between US and USSR, because the economic at that time is not so integrated as it is today. And also because one very peculiar phenomenon is there's a very close civil and military diffusion. Everything which can be used for chips can use for civil or commercial purpose can quickly translate into military capacity. And finally, of course, there's a collective action problem, both in country level and also in firm level. Okay, 4 years ago, when I started from talking about this, there was when US imposed export control on Qualcomm. And Taiwanese companies, MediaTek, they are so happy because they think they might benefit from the market access. If Qualcomm is prevented from shipping to China, then probably MediaTek in Taiwan can ship to Chinese enterprise. This is what we call as a collective action problem. So I think I still have two. So what role do we play in the context US-Taiwan chip war? The first point is the most important thing. We do have a MediaTek, one of the key players in IC design, but US can also do that. So that's not big concern for US economic security. But the most important one for US national economic security, the threat they feel, is the foundry. Both of the foundry is especially advanced processing is dominated by TSMC. And it is located in the earthquake area. Not only to this, it is located to somewhere which with high political attention. So foundry is a key critical element. And the second one, this is a case by DOJ of US. It's actually Fujian Jinhua is actually a subsidiary of Chinese company. And the UMC, Taiwanese company, its engineers was accused of economic theft and trade secrets against Micron. So it's very strange because Taiwanese engineering, they store trade secret from Micron for Chinese companies. Do you know what I mean? We are supposed to be very cautious of China, but Taiwanese engineers then steal trade secret from US companies and for Chinese enterprise. And I don't understand why. Yeah. And there's also export control, and because all the most important advanced softwares and equipments come from US, and if US impose export control, eventually it would impact on Taiwanese enterprise. This is what we call extraterritorial effects of US laws. And of course, there would be breach of contract, breach of trust and Taiwanese engineers, because a lot of Chinese enterprise, they want to recruit Taiwanese engineers to work in China. And it's very important. This is a threat to national security. I mean, economic security and national security of Taiwan. And finally, let's achieve four alliance. The key four countries here is US, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. The most important thing is how to coordinate these four countries, or how US to convince these four countries, the other three countries to on board. And of course, Taiwan is a very fidel US society. But how to get Korea and Republic of Korea and Japan together, it takes some skill. And as far as I see, Biden administration succeeded in doing this in last week or this week, the summit. And of course, internally, there's an internal divide. And there's also commercial interests. As I mentioned, commercial interest in Taiwan is not necessarily in line with our national interests of Taiwan. The most important thing is Territorial, who is the former chairman of Foxconn, who has very big and corporate interests in Taiwan, in China. He decided to run for the presidency of Taiwan. So we will see. You have very big businessmen who has big interest in China, and you are running the Taiwanese presidency. And this is what we face, not in terms of not only in terms of economic security, but also in terms of national security. And there are some arguments for and against Taiwan TSMC outbound investment. The biggest, against, the first one is production cost. As I mentioned, we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But this is not the case in US, less is true in Germany. So I have very serious doubt about how they profit from German Dresden case. And not only production cost, labor, electricity, and also labor union. In Taiwan, the union is very weak, but in US and in Germany, they are strong union. So how, and the most important, working culture one. And this is against. And for, in favor of investment, it's part of its internationalization strategy. And as a providers, TSMC has to diversify its production base. Then it can be trust and a reliable suppliers or reliable partner to its trade partners. So the decisive point here is, of course, it will be the critical technologies and how much the subsidies US and German government are willing to give. And of course, there must be some supporting industries and service in place. Yeah. In addition to skilled labor. So I think this is the most interesting part. I hope you will like it. As I mentioned, we are in a very tricky place. On the other hand, on the left-hand side, we have PRC. On the other hand, we have Pacific. We have Japan as our neighbor. Then if we move across the Pacific Ocean, then we arrive at the United States. So we are somewhere in between. And our president, President Lee, he was trained in Cornell. And President Ma, he was trained in Harvard. And President Tsai, he is trained in Cornell as well. But in fact, we are a society to some degree, to some degree, we are US skeptical. Which means we tend to believe US may abandon us someday. And when US withdrew from Afghanistan, it's widely spread that eventually someday US will abandon Taiwan, just it abandoned Afghanistan. This is part of a Chinese disinformation and cognitive war toward Taiwanese people. So then, when TSMC decide to invest in US, there's some rumor or some discourse saying that, okay, when TSMC invests in US, then US doesn't need Taiwan anymore because the most important thing for US is chips. A lot of people, they buy it. I don't know why. So in the coming months, in next months, we will have a survey. We call American Portrait. We want to know how Taiwanese perceive U.S., whether U.S. is credible or not. We would ask Taiwanese people whether they believe the investment of TSMC in Arizona will reduce the likelihood of U.S. deployment of troops when there is an armed conflict between Taiwan and China. And also in Taiwan, there are some people, one of the key figures may be Territorial. They think they can hedge, which means that politically we can stay with US, but economically we can benefit from China. This is also another discourse. And my final point here is, in fact, in these days, there is no choice. Actually, there is no possibility of hedging between Taiwan and China, because you cannot hedge on someone who may use armed force against you. This doesn't make sense. But when it comes to alliance with the US, if we cite very famous three words, voice, exit, loyalty. So it's not possible for Taiwan to exit from a US alliance. There's no choice, in fact. But to some degree, I think that the alliance is highly connected, and is in the words of Biden, with a rock-solid alliance. But the point here is, either in terms of US-Taiwan economic relations, or in the diplomatic alliances, or in the context Chip 4, how Taiwanese voice is heard in these alliances is a critical element. How to make sure Taiwanese voice is heard. I would like to conclude. My final point is, don't speak about us without us. This is what I want to say. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I was when you in your earlier parts of the presentation, seeing the acronym like DRAMs really remind me of my college days. Probably a lot of you can relate. And I also actually recently experienced the shortage of chip and how it affects your life on a first hand. I was visiting my family in Tokyo, and there's a Metro card that you can buy. You used to be able to buy anyway. For those of you who lived in Japan or traveled to Japan, you can relate to this. You can buy a vending machine at the station. You can go to a convenience store and pick one up to use while you're staying in Japan. But because of the chip shortage, there's no more new card available. So if you're going to Japan in the future, look around you for your friends who has traveled to Japan, before you, and to see if they can let you borrow their Metro card, because that's actually very critical. But thank you again. This was a very dense, a very, very informative presentation. Thanks very much. I've been promising Dr. Rich Cronin for his first question. So after his question, I will pick up another question from the floor if there is one, and belatedly welcome to all of you who are chiming in from online. So after that, we will go back and forth between the floor question and online question, and then I'll try to pick up as many as I can as the time allows. So without further ado, Rich.
Thank you.
Wait for the microphone.
Oh, thank you.
So that.
Are you going to hold it? Okay. Thank you. Well, this is very
comprehensive coverage of this issue, the whole issue, really. And I wanted to compliment you in particular on just on the important points you made about the linkage of politics and economics and technology in this case, particularly in terms of Taiwan, political change in Taiwan. And then the idea of capitalism, Taiwan's small market capitalism versus China's state capitalism. But you really hit it, I think, with the idea that foundries were the critical element. And also your mention of the like-minded countries, cooperating on these issues. So my question is about all of this is that the technology and the economics of this industry and of Taiwan's dominant position in foundries is not so hard to grasp, but the issue of China being left out, and it's not only can China not get chips from the U.S. and Taiwan with U.S. IPR, but more importantly, it can't get the foundry equipment to make the most leading edge chips. And it just seems to me like this is a train wreck coming, and but I don't know how it would play out. But could you then just comment a little more about Taiwan's role in as a dominant foundry producer of leading edge chips, and the fact that and whether offshoring ultimately, do you think will challenge Taiwan's dominance or not? Thank you.
Yeah, and then I would add, Rich talked about offshoring, but then I would ask about friendshoring that you touched upon.
So very quick, for the equipment, I think the most important player is ASML, the Dutch enterprise. In late few weeks ago or a few months ago, they also agreed to be on board to stand in line with U.S. position in containing or to preventing the Chinese enterprise to acquire the equipment. So this, I think, in this chip war, I think one of the key players, in addition to chip 4, the Dutch government, it has also is also on board. And in terms of foundry service or production, according to some forecast, at least in 5 to 10 years, Taiwan will still dominate the foundry service. And this is, okay, imagine from 1986 or 1987, the first day TSMC was established. In the past 4 decades, it is a profit enterprise. It's a profit-making company, but eventually, the reason why foundry would be located in Taiwan and in South Korea, because it's mainly because U.S. enterprise, they don't want to do it, and they decide to outsource to Asian economics. So, and Korean companies and Taiwanese companies, they are doing this in a very extended way. And because, in my case, in our case, the best are students in Taiwan. They go to TSMC.
Say again?
The best are students in Taiwan. They go to TSMC, and doing these are not so creative jobs. I'm a lawyer, I can say that. Lawyer is more creative than engineer. So it doesn't make sense. It makes economic sense. That's why it has been there for 40 years. And you want, because of geopolitical reasons, countries, Europe and US, they want to have a foundry in their own territory. But to some degree, it can have some. These countries, they can have some. But I would say from 5 years to 10 years, Taiwan will still be a dominant position in foundry. And it makes sense economically. And if we want to change it through political reasons or political means, or for strategic purpose, I would say my imagination is that the US want to have its chips for its F-35 from Arizona. It makes sense. But if US automobile want to have its chips by TSMC in Arizona, maybe it takes some calculation for this. Yeah.
So before going, Bob and then I'll then go to the online questions. There are a couple of there are audiences that have been very patient behind the camera. So.
Yeah, I just have a large macro question. Until very recently, that the notion that economics was a zero-sum game was not really accepted. And I guess the question is this really a zero-sum game, or is it a question of buying time? In other words, are we going to preclude China from getting the technology that the Biden administration is blocking, or is it going to be 10 or 15 years until China figures it out? And if that's the case, does it make sense to have politics in command of economics?
Do you want to go to that?
Okay, it really depends on how much we believe in Chinese innovation capacities. If we believe eventually China will get it, then the best way is, as I mentioned, in the two competing regionals, the best way is to run faster. We can benefit from Chinese enterprise, and then we can invest our next generation of technologies. But maybe I'm biased. Yeah, I don't think China can make it. Yeah, I don't think China can make it. You just look at what has been, okay, Tsinghua Uni spender, who used to claim it would invest TSMC to invest MediaTek. Now it's already broke. And, okay, if China doesn't have talents, doesn't have equipment, doesn't have technologies, I really doubt China can make it. Yeah. It really depends on how you believe. If you believe China eventually it will make it. And I think if you read I think two issues here is related. The first one is in this month, China is experiencing deflation. This is China's economic deflation is very critical. The second issue is demographic issues. There are no laborers, no production force in China. I think these two issues would be a serious, very serious issue for China. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, thank you for your patience. Our online audience, the first question comes from the Ambassador Menon, former ambassador of India. India happens to be a global leader in semiconductor chip design, yet India imports all of its semiconductors. In this context, do you think Taiwan can play a role in terms of increasing investments in the manufacturing of semiconductor chips in India? If so, how do you see the major Taiwanese chip companies using this India opportunity from a purely commercial angle and investing big in India?
Okay, Ambassador, I don't want to be rude, but as we know, India is famous for its service. And I think in this 3 months also, the investment, I think it's again is by Foxconn. They try to establish some alliance to develop semiconductor in India, but eventually it doesn't work so well. Yeah, if I recall correctly. So I would say manufacturing and service, they are different, very different. I also understand that India is trying to pursue Taiwanese government and its enterprise to invest in India. But I really don't think it is a good idea. Maybe IC design is the comparative advantage of Indian talents and Indian companies. But in terms of manufacturing, I have some reservation on this. Because really depends on the working culture, talents, and infrastructures. As I say for tons of times, we Taiwanese work 24 hours a day and 7 days a week.
I mean, no question, that's such a good thing. Thank you, right here.
Thank you for the discussion. My name is Ken Scabe from Marbury Corporation. So my question is, I guess you have, in terms of the coming Taiwan president election, so I guess you have already implied about the Territorial, but I also would like to ask you, share with us about your insight or your concern on the national security, economic security policy of other candidates, including the writing the current Hoyoi.
And I think because we're running out of time, I'll tackle one more question that is from online, and then I'll let you answer those questions. So the next question is regarding the decoupling approach that the U.S. has been taking against China. How do you think, how does the chip decoupling approach that U.S. is taking will impact its BRI, Beijing's ambition in the Belt and Road Initiative? And how do you see the future of the Chip 4 alliance that you mentioned in view of industrial interest and national interest? And how is the U.S. How so far is U.S. successful to basically encouraging its allies to realigning its policy similar to theirs?
Okay, I will do it in a reverse way. I think so far U.S. is doing a very good job. I have to say I was surprised to see Dutch government was on board. And I have to say, I was also surprised to see the Territorial Summit between U.S., Japan, and Korea. And if you want to, I can also make some example. Okay, we see the Fukushima now, and China is very angry about that. Probably it's only China and Hong Kong in the era who are very vocal on this. So this is an example. I mean, U.S. is aligning its key partners in terms of diplomatic position, but also in terms of strategic position. And in terms of China's BRI, again, maybe I'm biased, and I don't want to pretend I'm 100% objective. So the problem for BRI would be whether China is economically or financially able to support this. And we saw a lot of local debt, and we saw the some of the biggest real estate companies, they cannot pay their debt, and the local debt issues. And whether China is able to support economically and financially for its BRI, I really I really doubt it, to be honest. So this is my position on this. And with regard to Taiwanese point, yeah, the difficulty in terms of economic security and national security is we have okay, the commercial interest is not always in line with our national interest. But at the national interest level, we have some candidates who are more or less feudal China, or think they can hedge, or they can move between US and China. And if there's a very fine space, they think they can make it in working on a very fine roads. And this is the difficulty we face today. And okay, not only Territorial, who has a very heavy commercial interest in China, and okay, the KMT, also Cointer, they also, to some degree, they think economically they still can rely on China. And this is the threat to some, from my perspective, this is the threat. And I think they are, okay, they are also the one who would say, okay, the reason why US asked TSMC to invest in Arizona is to abandon Taiwan. Unfortunately, we still in a very political divide, and there are some people they still believe they can benefit from Chinese economic rise. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry that we didn't have time to get to all of your questions, but unfortunately, hour apparently is too short to cover this kind of a dense and complex topic. So that is a lesson learned for me for future. But again, thank you, Dr. Wu, for your research while you're with us. We've been very happy to host you. And he's here, by the way, for another week and until the end of the week. So if you would like to get more thoughts on his presentation and other related topics, please feel free after the event and make connections. So with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you for chiming in for online. And this concludes today's event. Thank you very much, Dr. Wu.